Goodness. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to In the Area Productions presents A Conversation with White Dudes. I am Ben Reuler, the founder and CEO of In the Area Productions. I support white people with accessing our power to make anti-racist change in this cruel world. I love being in the human potential business, and I love being with you all today. The amazing Nin Johnson is our Zoom jockey for today, our ZJ. Nin, will you please bring our panelists into view? All right, let's go. Okay, let's get right into it. Nathan Bean. Nathan, I love you, man.
Hey, brother.
Okay, Nathan, just this week, I think it was on Monday or Tuesday, I received an email from my fourth grade son's teacher in Seattle Public Schools informing all the families of and caregivers of her students about their upcoming section on Native American and Indian boarding and residential schools. In the letter, the teacher said, quote, "The boarding school era is not a pleasant piece of history, yet it is essential in understanding the full story of our state of Washington and its first peoples." I love this. My heart was very warm seeing that they were going to be doing age-appropriate history like this. Okay, I certainly was not taught this real history of my Pacific Northwest public school education. You, Mr. Nathan Bean, you have what I consider to be a sophisticated understanding of our country's history, our real history, right? Your professional job is with Sankofa Impact, an organization that confronts our shared history of racism and resistance through place-based learning experiences. Shout out to Felicia Ashino, the legendary executive director with Sankofa Impact, who's with us today. Nathan, you just returned from another powerful pilgrimage through the South, New Orleans, Memphis, Montgomery, Atlanta, where you met with civil rights foot soldiers and present-day activists. As part of your work with Sankofa Impact, you engage in sessions about things like the social construction of whiteness and much more. Mm-hmm. Will you talk to us about your journey as a white dude, kind of confronting the facts of this real American history that is deeply, deeply rooted in white supremacy, racism, and oppression? I mean, I'm embarrassed for my public school system. I'm embarrassed for myself that I probably was deep in my 30s before I started to get a much more nuanced understanding of like the realities of our history, locally and nationally. I'm curious to hear about your practical journey. Like, when did you actually start learning about this more holistic truth of our country's past? Mm-hmm. And like your emotional journey, like what has it been like for you to come to terms with where we've been as a country and where we're at?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Ben. Thanks for convening us. Thanks to Britton and Sean and Nin and everybody who is taking time out of your day. Yeah, that's a great question. And I reflect on that a lot because certain things kind of, I think, reveal themselves the deeper I am in the work. And I remember back to times when maybe I had an aha moment, I wasn't even aware of it. And my upbringing in the, so this is New Hampshire. This is where I'm from, 603. That's where I was born. And then Seattle is where I'm from. And it's something that I've thought about a lot about, I grew up in New Hampshire's like a segregated state. It's lily white, growing up, especially in the 80s. And I think back to who were the first kind of Black faces I would have seen. It would have been Robert Parrish, through sports, Jim Rice, Andre Tippett. And so at some point I would have discovered MTV and I would have discovered Prince and Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. And then at some point I discovered, or Spike Lee kind of grabbed me by the throat and said that you have some things that you have to learn, right? And I saw Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X. I went out, I bought Alex Haley's and Malcolm X's autobiography. And I started to realize, at the time I didn't have the words for it, but that if I wanted to get more history, I was going to have to find it on my own. That the history of the country was being taught to me in a way. I remember, I'll never forget, I was in 7th grade, Mr. Allen's social studies class. And I think I had just seen Malcolm X, and I went and I said, I want to talk more about slavery, right in the middle of class. And Mr. Allen said, well, we covered it already in the chapter, in the textbook. And I tried to push it, and I was probably performing, even though we didn't call it that at the time, but I was trying to kind of stop everything to say, like, wait a minute. And he kind of just had this answer of like, listen, it's the textbook. It's the textbook. And I got kind of rolled over. We kept going. I think I've always wanted to know more, because I've always had an idea that there's more there. And I think over the last, 20 years, moved to Seattle 20 years ago, have kind of like slowly but surely been keeping my eye on the culture and the history and understanding myself. I went to Haiti after the earthquake. I was there 2 days after the earthquake in 2010. Learning about the history of Haiti radicalized me as much as anything. And knowing about the revolution there, what's happened since the revolution, and how they've been sort of cut off in a lot of ways from the rest of the world, the amount of nonprofits there. So I think I went back to school, and I went on one of these trips to the South, a pilgrimage to the South. And all these little moments for me, I guess, the long answer to your question, I'm a big story person. And I've gotten a lot from, watching Spike Lee movies and reading articles, but I think I've gotten no more than, everything than when I'm in a place and I'm learning in a place and I'm talking to someone and I'm having that kind of transformative experience. And I think the more I've understood about whiteness and the more I've understood about the history of the country, the more I've been transformed into somebody who just wants to know more and sees it as a really important part of knowing who I am and who we all are, and wanting everybody to be free. Fannie Lou Hamer is from Ruleville, Mississippi, is a civil rights activist who's kind of very plain spoken. She grew up a sharecropper. She said, nobody's free till everybody's free. And I think now basically that's what kind of fuels me, and I think knowing the history has done a lot for me, and I think it does a lot for everybody. And that's the short and sweet part of the story.
Thank you, Nathan. I just really hear sort of a theme going back to middle school of kind of intentionality of seeking experiences and education that you might not know what it is, but you haven't been presented a full picture, and taking responsibility for understanding a more full picture and your context in that, and how that manifests today. I appreciate that. Sean Marsh. Sean, you have built a remarkable career as a fundraiser. Many people who I love and respect you. Everybody I mentioned, I know you, or you're going to be on my panel. Oh, I love Sean. Sean's a legend, great guy. You recently received a really prestigious award from the University of Washington Advancement. Congratulations again on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Listen, philanthropy is kind of having a moment though, right? I mean, a lot of wealth has been built on worker exploitation. Things like donor advised funds are hella weird. I'm like, I was a fundraiser for 15 years. I still don't get some of this stuff, but like people can literally put money in there, get the tax break, and never actually dispense any of it to organizations. I'm like, that's weird. There's literally like $1 trillion sitting in foundation endowments and donor advised funds right now while the world is on fire. I think foundations are required to pay out like only 5% or 10% or something. And taxpayers are subsidizing up to 74 cents for every dollar donated by wealthy people. But I digress. Sorry, I'm just going off now.
No, right,
look, I was a fundraiser for 14 or 15 years. I will say most of the donors, institutional and individual, who I engaged with, I would say generally were pretty authentic relationships rooted in trust and mutual respect and values. And while I have had so many positive relationships with funders and donors and in the advancement kind of field, I admit, man, like there's some stuff in my decade and a half of fundraising that I am still unpacking. And I have some serious receipts. I'm telling you, like individuals, institutions, but also receipts on myself for being very complicit in some of those moments and situations, for clinging to my own comfort, for not challenging the status quo when every little firework in my body was like, this is weird. This is not okay, right? I feel like philanthropy's kind of shortcomings, especially around power and equity, are a little bit being brought to light after being kind of more unspoken for so long. And I'm curious, what has this been like for you as a white male fundraiser? You're raising money for a great cause, public higher education, and you're doing it in this capitalist system and at a time when the field is kind of in the midst of this reevaluation or reckoning, right, of how fundraisers and donors operate. Like, how are you doing what you do with a racial equity lens, or do you? Talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, you're spot on in a lot of the things that you said. And I think, it's higher education is trying to figure this thing out, and it's long past due. I'm at the University of Washington, the Bothell campus right now, and UW has hired somebody I think from your past, Ben, and Leilani Lewis, to try and get us on the doing the right thing path, and it's been a long time coming in terms of figuring this thing out. And it's in no way is this thing figured out at all. But leaders like Leilani and other folks that are working with her and on her team. I've recently been named to the Equity Council there at UW Advancement. And so I'm there to listen and learn and try and help and provide. But I haven't figured this out yet, but I think everything that you said, and, I've been doing this now since 2007. So about 15 years. I was in higher ed before that as well, in financial aid. And I started my fundraising career out at Temple University. And one of the first donors that wanted to make a gift was a Black woman who wanted to provide funding for nurses of color at Temple University. And we had to deny that, and we couldn't make that work because of laws like I-200 and those things. And that was a really hard learning curve for me right off the bat. It was in my first year, and I had really gotten to know this donor well, and I was really looking forward to work with her to make a difference. And just couldn't be done at the time based on laws and restrictions in place. So I learned a lot as a student at Temple University in terms of the folks that I met there and people from all over the world. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot going on right now in fundraising, and it's, I don't have the answers really, Ben. I'm just trying to figure it out every day and work with great people and listen to great people and use whatever position and privilege I have to try and make a difference. Nathan, I thought you said, already, I haven't met Nathan or Britton before. And it was great to hear from you, Nathan. It was funny because Do the Right Thing shaped me as a kid, as well as did Crooklyn and some of the other movies that Spike Lee has done. So, just trying to keep figuring this out. I'm 47 and I certainly haven't figured it out, but trying to be, hold myself responsible in the ways that we need to. I loved your quote there too, Nathan, because we all need to be a part of this, and we all need to be working on it together. So yeah, Ben, I don't have the answers yet, but I try and do it every day. I'm trying to learn every day, trying to just listen to the people that are telling me about it and talking about it and doing the right thing and trying to be there and hold myself accountable.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Well, I think that's a good point too. Just like, I feel like, especially after the murder of George Floyd, there's a lot of good intention and people wanting to do better, but have been built up to this, like, as if there's some endpoint or something, when the reality is this is how are we trending in the right direction every day? How am I reserving the right to wake up tomorrow a little better than I am today? And how am I supporting and influencing my spheres at work and home and family, online, each and every day to sort of chip away and get better? And I love that you're giving a shout out to Leilani Lewis at UW. Yeah, I love Leilani, love what she's doing there. And I'm actually going to be helping the UW Advancement with some launching a White Caucus pilot, which I'm really excited about. And
You told me about that.
Yeah, through some of that, I'm seeing some of the things on the UW Advancement, the vision, the values, the actions, explicitly acknowledging institutionally a commitment to anti-racism and incorporating anti-racism into everything we do. And while you say there's no answers and there's a lot of work to be done, it seems like it's starting to be more embedded in institutions and systems accountability versus just people who happen to care most, right? So I think that's a lot of the battle. How do we embed this into the DNA of our places of employment, for example. So
I think you're 100% right. I know you want to move on. I just want to say you're right, and it's 100% not a, hey, we did that thing, let's just move on. This is a every day forward for as long as I'm around, as long as I live. This is just, this is the deal. This is constant work, and it's work that has needed to be done for a long time. We need to keep doing it. We need to do it better.
Yeah. And a local Seattle legend and author, Ijeoma Oluo, I said, often what we do will never be quite right or enough, yet absolutely vital and urgent, and to sit with that duality, that this is a commitment of perpetuity, that collectively, through time and space and generations, we can hopefully start shifting. But it's going to really require us white dudes to really get with the program here. So thank you for that perspective, Sean.
Yes.
My dude, Britton Taylor, representing Portland, Oregon. Thanks for being here, Britton. Britton, you have had a remarkable career in advertising. You have been part of big ideas, big projects, big clients, big failures, big wins, from KFC to Old Spice. Like, you have really helped jolt some big name brands back into major relevancy. Like, you're pretty dope at what you do. And similar, like I said about the others, people I know and respect, know and respect you. And it's been so cool watching your star rise throughout your career. I've known you for a while now, and just so impressed, not surprised, but very impressed with the trajectory of your career and your influence in your field. It's also been really cool watching you evolve as an outspoken advocate for equal rights, and against hate and oppression. I feel like a lot of people, we want to be anti-racist or allies, but really shy away from anything political and just clinging to comfort, right? I'm one of them. I'm working on it. I'm a recovering conflict-averse scaredy cat who doesn't like rocking the boat, but really having to grapple with how complicit I've been through decade after decade of my life, because I've been scared to be uncomfortable or engage in anything that could be awkward or put a spotlight on me. You, Britton, however, have made political engagement a cornerstone of your life, right? Even beyond your prolific online presence, where you're getting, tens of thousands of retweets and this and that. You spend a lot of time volunteering as a communication director, I think, for a political group. You recently organized a protest. You just always seem to be speaking out, which I'm sure is just exhausting and like the last thing you really want to be doing with your time, but you just keep showing up and exerting energy to call out radical, oppressive forces. And I really have admired that. And that's why I invited you to be here today. And I would love for you to talk to us about your journey with an approach to political engagement and also using your voice.
Yeah, great question. And thanks for bringing us all together to talk about this stuff. I think it's helpful to, give some context and to provide my story. I'm a product of two parents with deep Southern roots. I grew up in Tennessee. My mom's from South Carolina. My father grew up in Richmond, Virginia. His two dogs growing up were named Stonewall and Jeb, both named after, obviously, Confederate generals, to give you a sense of kind of where I started. So I think my life has been sort of a continuous learning process and reprogramming from how I was raised in the environment that I grew up in. And I give a lot of credit to my wife, who I think has always led a value-based life, whom has had these conversations about diversity and equity and racism, have been a part of her family story for a long time. So I appreciate her. I give some credit to my former employer, Dan Wyden, who we can talk more about later. And then I hate to do this, but I give props to Trump, who helped to radicalize me in 2016. I think following that election, I was full of a lot of despair and looking for a way to get involved and to make a difference. And there's no better way to do that than I think at the local level. And so following that election, I did get involved with my local Democratic Party. And I've kind of made it my mission to lean into my privilege and to help bring other people along and to help elevate, you know, the historically marginalized, and to help to tell their story. And yes, it has become my nature to kind of put myself out there. I recently organized a protest against Phil Knight, who's been giving a lot of money to right-wing candidates. Fortunately, none of his chosen candidates won in the midterms, but you know, that comes with exposure, that comes with risk and vulnerability. But you know, I think it's the work we as white men especially have to do if we want to see change.
Thanks, Britt, and I appreciate that. And yeah, I feel like that acting locally, we can make big differences locally. Change starts at the local level, and it's also a place for us to feel a sense of purpose when we're feeling that despair and hopelessness. And yeah, when I saw you on the news organizing a protest at Nike headquarters against Phil Knight, you know, what people on this call may not realize is, you know, you spent over a decade with Wieden and Kennedy, you know, Nike's advertising agency. Like Nike and Wieden and Kennedy are hand in hand, right? Like you all rock Nikes to work because of that deep relationship. And so to me, that wasn't just you taking a stand, but like, I know you have colleagues who were like, well, I'm not, yeah, I love Britain, or maybe I agree with him, but I'm not going out there, like, you know, and like that, I was like, I knew behind the scenes, like, man, that's not to say you're taking huge risks or anything, like, let's be real, you know, in the big scheme of things, especially what our BIPOC friends and family have dealt with for generations, that's not a huge risk for you. But nevertheless, for me, seeing that, I was like, wow, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do that so publicly, knowing how enmeshed that all is in Portland and advertising and your line of work and your professional peers. So that really was impressive to me. And I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nathan, how has your journey around self-love and self-awareness contributed to your ability to engage in really uncomfortable and exhausting conversations? Because not only are you doing this through work, but I've admired you because you sort of don't use this work at Sankofa Impact to compartmentalize. Like, dude, you're having exhausted conversations on social media with family and friends, like all the time. And again, it's a small burden for us to bear, but it's exhausting, right? Even for us guys with all the buffers and privilege. Talk to us about how you're like self-awareness, self-love, whatnot, like, or if I'm off with the question, feel free to call me out on that.
Oh, no. You're exactly right. I think I was just thinking you would mention something about having to live in the binary of all of this, that there's even something to just name, you know, four white men coming together to talk about race. There's a lot of folks out there who would reject this out of hand, right? And I get it. They wouldn't be wrong necessarily. I think that when you are white and you choose to do this work, you have to sort of take on some responsibility of, I think that's kind of what you said, right? That you're not going to get it. We are not going to get this right. The only reason that I am where I am is because I've gotten things wrong and learned from them and continued to stay in to the conversation and into the fight because it's mattered to me. And I think these conversations, like the more comfortable I am with that duality, the longer I'm able to stay in it. And then I don't know when it happened, but I probably passed a point of no return at some point where I just decided, well, this is who I am now. It's now part of my character. At Sankofa Impact, we talk a lot about wanting to create everyday activists. That activism when Black and brown people are brutalized is one thing that's needed. Those protests and those moments of flair as a society are needed. I think what's really needed and what we've maybe been missing for a long time is everyday activism, that it's a muscle, like having a sense of humor, having a sense of empathy, of love, that having a sense of activism is something that we all need. And I think that for me, part of what, again, I guess I kind of said this earlier too, for me, it's been like stories. It's been sitting with people. It's been talking with people, and it's been talking with like white people. And every time that I'm having one of those conversations, they're varying degrees of like uncomfortable, but I'm learning something too. It's not just extractive or transactional. I'm being transformed in that moment too. And so I find myself having them partly because I think if you can scratch beneath the surface, a lot of white folks have a lot of feelings about race. They've got a lot that they actually want to say that they've been holding, which lets you know, I don't think that there's a whole lot of white Americans who have no opinion on this. I think that you can buffer yourself from having to talk about it, and then I think a lot of people felt that buffer evaporate in 2020 when Breonna Taylor was murdered, right? And so I think that there's ways that people want to have this conversation, and they see me, some folks have seen me as someone that they can talk to, and I'm willing to have it. And I think that your point around self-love is well heard. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't that I haven't for my entire life struggled with loving myself. Of course I have, for a myriad of reasons, because I am who I am. I come to this work, I think Jay-Z said something like you were who you were when you got here, like that. I think I'm willing to have the conversation. I'm open to holding that binary, partly because I'm in that place of always wanting to love myself better. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you another thing too, and then I'll stop talking. When you have a child, so my kid who is my little prince, my 15-year-old who's at Franklin, is on the spectrum, and we've been having this conversation about race for years now. I remember, when Baltimore was burning down after Freddie Gray died, we were talking about why this was happening, telling him that Dr. King actually said a riot is the language of the unheard, and saying that these folks are feeling unheard. And so they're in their community and crying kind of publicly as a neighborhood. And we're having this talk, and he's, 8, 9, trying to kind of figure out and having to go through the extra steps of being on the spectrum and not seeing things linearly. And I think, to be honest with you, in terms of how I love myself, it almost is a reflection of how I love my son. And I don't know if there is better work that I will ever do than trying to teach him and trying to walk with him to be a better kind of white man. And all the conversations I've had, they're all meaningful, but I think of that one because that one's the closest, because the second most important is probably the one I've had with myself, and trying to have a better one all the time. So I'll stop there.
Whew. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Sean, back to you. Every time I am within earshot of a police officer, I try to thank them for their service. Okay, whether I'm at a Starbucks or they're on foot patrol on the street or working security at Dick's Sporting Goods, I'm always like, hey, thank you for your service, right? That's not a job I think I could do. And while I have deep concerns about systems of policing on a macro level, I try to give individual officers the benefit of the doubt and thank them for their service and the courage it takes to do that. And I think those thin blue line flags, these Blue Lives Matter flags, are super problematic. I acknowledge that those flags, the meaning is complex and nuanced to some people, that maybe the origin was around, supporting our officers. But I really agree. There's a police chief in Wisconsin. Nin, if you're able to copy this NBC News link I shared into the chat, I would appreciate it. Otherwise, I can do it. But this, a police officer in Wisconsin who banned the use of the blue line flag by its force because the police chief acknowledged this has come to signal opposition to the racial justice movement. It's a symbol for white supremacy. Sean, I have been struggling with kind of if and when to use my white male privilege to engage with white male strangers. I'm constantly doing this thing. Is it worth it? Probably not going to change someone's mind. I may put myself in harm's way. Could be just distracting, and it's freaking exhausting, right? It may also make it a tad more inconvenient if I do say something to a stranger, just a little bit more inconvenient for someone to be racist. Or, if we all did that, if all white men were, letting go of our comfort a little bit, and trying to engage with strangers with grace and love, but directly, it would probably make a pretty big difference. There's one dude, he coaches a youth baseball team that's always at the same tournaments as my son in the summer. And he's got that thin blue line flag on his truck, you know, and one time we were parked next to each other and I almost said something, but I ultimately chose not to. You live in a community with a lot of these types of what I consider to be white supremacy imagery around you. Okay. I'm curious, like on a personal level, how do you approach living in your community with your values? What conversations are you having with strangers, if any? And also like your friends, your families, your kids, like what's your MO? How do you think about this? Do you have any advice for us other white dudes on the call? Because it's something I feel like I'm pretty stuck with.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really great question. I'll go back. I won't take too much time because I know we're short, but I was born outside of Philadelphia and moved to Arlington, Washington, the community you're talking about now, when I was just 2 in the late 70s. My dad got an opportunity to work there, and I noticed, you know, as a kid right away that was, you know, pretty much an entirely white community because we talked about it. I was fortunate to have parents in the household that talked about that. And then we ended up moving back east after my father passed away, and my mom got a job at Temple University in Philadelphia. And all the things that my father and mother had taught me when I was young about, you know, marginalized folks and battling and fighting for the underrepresented all came through to me at Temple. And I just met so many different people from so many different cultures and regions and areas. And it was like I was thunderstruck kind of and hit by I need to be active. And it's funny you mentioned this because I was taking some notes last night. And one of the things I said was hold family, friends, and strangers accountable. And I circled strangers last night when I was looking at it because that's something that I've had to do all my life. I think I started in my teenage years. You know, many people might not know this about Philadelphia, but that can be a very racist city. And when you're around just white folks, especially white men or white teenagers, when I was there, they often would say extremely racist and offensive things. And so I took a point at one point to say that's not allowed to be said in front of me. And you would often see them look around like, why can't I say it? I don't see any Black folks around, you know, or whatever that was. And that was something that I just decided to start challenging when I was younger because I missed my dad and I wanted to fight for what I believed he would want me to fight for. So for me, it became a natural battle because I wanted to honor the life that he wanted me to lead and that he didn't get to finish. So for me, it's kind of always been that thing where whenever I can, I'm gonna try and stand up and do that. Now we're in a time, you know, Britain mentioned it with 2016, and you know it's more dangerous a little bit now to be making some of those challenges. So you do have to kind of keep your eye out and maybe pick your shots, but you gotta find a space to do it though. And I am, you know, you mentioned that I have 2 kids, and my wife is Native American. My kids are obviously Native American, and when we moved to that community, it came up. My daughter brought it up to me. She said, I see these flags, I see these sweatshirts all the time. And I said, listen, you know, we're going to make change in our community. We're going to start small. We can have an impact in this community by being activists, like Nathan said, every single day. I said, I don't need you fighting with every kid in school or everything like that, but they're going to know where you stand. They're going to know where I stand. They're going to know where our family stands and who we align ourselves with and how we do that. And so that's what we do. We try and start small in our circle and make an impact. Everybody I know back east or here knows where we stand. And so maybe sometimes because I've been doing it for a long time, maybe that makes it a little bit easier, but it's never easy. You know, it's uncomfortable, like you said. And, you know, there are times where I've probably been mad at myself for not saying something. Majority of the times I hope that I do. And if I didn't, I better learn from it and figure out and at least self-assess on what I could have done better and how I can do it better the next time.
Whew. Thank you, Sean. I love that you're talking to your kids about this stuff. And I'm just so moved with your anecdote about your dad and how your parents were planting these seeds and laying this foundation maybe not even knowing, maybe you not even knowing how this would manifest. But then when you got out east, right, because they had not avoided conversations about injustice and race, you were then able to take those values that maybe you couldn't even put words to as a kid and start operationalizing them. So to me, that's just another call for us, white parents, to not shy away from conversations about race and racism and white supremacy with our kids. And there's a lot of resources out there on how to do that in an age appropriate way.
Yep.
But that's the privilege we have as white people, that we can kind of intellectualize or opt in or opt out, or just not deal with this stuff if we don't want to, where a lot of our neighbors and peers and family members of color just don't have a choice as to whether or not they're thinking about and talking about race and racism. So what a beautiful testament to your father and your parents' legacy. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. And real quick, shout out to what you said about self-love, and what Nathan said about how being a parent is, probably the very most important thing we can start with. These kids are gonna, they're gonna keep getting better than us. And I keep saying, work hard within our circle, work hard within our family, work hard within our community, but don't stop there. Check on the waves, like make sure those waves are rippling. Like, don't just say something to some friend one time and then not ever talk to them again. Check back with them, see where they stand, see what they've learned. So we're constantly kind of trying to have those conversations too.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. Back to you, Britton. I mentioned earlier, your career has been mostly in advertising. Not a surprise to many of us that sector has been notoriously white and white male dominated. As I mentioned, for over a decade, you were at Wieden & Kennedy, which is the firm that does advertising for Nike and just so many other companies. And one of Wieden & Kennedy's co-founders, Dan Wieden, passed away just within the last few months. And it's been fascinating as I've been online reading these testimonials about co-founder Dan Wieden, who died. So many people reflecting about Dan's life and legacy, and a lot of themes around, here's this white dude, this boomer who really helped open doors and help call the advertising industry to account and really lead with values. It's been really powerful seeing these reflections. We know from people like critically acclaimed Seattle-based author Ruchika Tulsyan that inclusion doesn't just happen. It takes intention and hard work, like we've all been talking about. So Britton, I'm curious if you have noticed any trends in your advertising industry that you see as leading to overdue systemic changes that are kind of rooted in racial equity. What conversations are you having with colleagues or clients? As an independent practitioner right now, are you using any type of racial equity lens in your approach to work with clients? Just talk to us about the field of advertising, and I'm hoping you can give us some reasons to be hopeful, but yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think the advertising industry has come a long way, and yet we, of course, still have a long way to go. Dan Wieden, who wrote Just Do It, to sort of share with you the very close connection between Nike and Wieden & Kennedy. He's very much an inspirational figure in my life. He was one of the first people in the industry to truly call the industry to account when it comes to issues of inclusivity and equity. I can't remember if he was receiving a big award in New York, but he did a huge speak about the systemic issues in our business and the opportunities in our business. He specifically said, I'm a white man who hires white people to sell expensive shoes to Black kids, which I think is a very honest and transparent and self-aware way to talk about what we do. And I think it was in the mid-90s when he actually started a nonprofit called Caldera Arts, whose sole mission was to reach out to historically marginalized communities and give them a space in a community where they can really tap into their more creative selves. And that organization has had a huge impact, I know, on thousands of lives here in the Portland community. So very much a role model for the work that he's done. I think Wieden & Kennedy was also one of the first firms in my industry to kind of roll out DEI training and education for all employees. I was one of the people at Wyden who helped to bring in Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations. Glenn is another hero of mine, and now I think every Wyden Kennedy employee goes through that training. And I think we were one of the first businesses to kind of instill that training in employees. And I think now it's something that every other most big agencies, I think, put their employees through a similar type of training. So I'm thankful for helping to pave the way for that. Yeah, like I said, there's still lots of work to do. I attended an online forum yesterday called Allyship in Action, led by a group of Black people in industry, people of color in industry, and it's all about really calling attention to the work that still needs to be done. It's still a very difficult environment for people of color. The advertising industry, it's still very white centric. I think we've increased our numbers of people of color, but at the leadership positions, man, we're still very white, still very male, still very cis. So a lot of work to be done, but I'm very encouraged by the progress that we've made, and I hope that work continues. Personally, I've been in this business long enough that I can start to draw some lines. I personally choose not to work with companies like Amazon and Meta, companies that I know have been pretty problematic for lots of different reasons. And I try to bring a diverse perspective to things whenever I possibly can, and to make sure that different opinions, different perspectives are heard in all the work that I do.
Thank you, Britt, and I appreciate it. And I didn't mean to be rude by looking at my phone, but as you were talking, it made me think of something. The Wyden Kennedy's Black Lives Matter statement in 2020. I know we got to take these external statements, with a grain of salt. And what's posted on Instagram is obviously often quite performative. Nevertheless, in 2020. That summer 2020, I probably had, I think I stopped counting it, 8 different white executive directors in Seattle who called me sort of freaking out. What has your organization been doing? What consultants have you been working with? Really struggling with navigating this in a real way. And some people from certain companies too were saying like, oh, we can't say Black Lives Matter even because it feels like a political statement. It's like, man, that is not a political statement. And I've seen a lot of different statements over the years, and I don't read any into them too much, but I will say the Wyden and Kennedy one, I do want to read because to me, it was probably the most powerful statement I've seen. And I just want to read it. This is from the advertising agency that you used to work for. Black Lives Matter. There is nothing controversial about this statement. If you do not support this sentiment as an employee, you should find somewhere else to work. If you do not support this sentiment as one of our partners, we do not want to be affiliated. If you do not support this sentiment as a client, we'll gladly support you finding another agency. Relationships are based on shared values, and if we can't agree on this simple statement, we're too far apart for things to work. And it goes on with some more stuff, but I thought, man, that is pretty clear and bold. And I think, again, whether it was performative, I don't know the behind the scenes, but it certainly sends a message that I wish other companies and institutions would be, as clear about, right? So listen, I could ask you guys questions all day. We're coming up on about 10 minutes left. I am going to make an executive decision here to open it up for questions from the audience. Since white men often, not always, but often white men can be the first to raise our hands and to take up the most space. Again, not all the time, but certainly we can agree that that's a quantifiable trend. I want to open it up first and foremost, kind of first rights of refusal to anybody who does not identify as a cis white man. Okay. I see a question in the chat. What about giving up privilege? That's all it says in the chat. Would any of you like to talk about that? And if whoever asked that, if you would like to qualify that or contextualize that, feel free to unmute and do that, but no pressure.
think it's I think it's a great question. It's a central tension, I think, of being white and choosing to have these conversations. I think of intersectionality too. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw in the Bay. Like how we give up privilege isn't, you know, necessarily just a matter of race. It can be gender, it can be class. I think of giving up privilege as not a I think that there's a lot, I think that a lot of paranoia, especially in white men, and I think it's been happening, I know it's been happening for centuries, is around the idea that it's like a zero sum, right? Again, shout out to Heather McGee. So if I give up my privilege in any way, then necessarily it means you'll treat me the way that I treated you, or I will have nothing, or my livelihood will be gone. Rather than framing it around, if I give up some privilege, you will have some privilege, and all of us will have more privilege. All of us will do. Nobody's free till everybody's free. Fannie Lou Hamer. So I think when I think of giving up privilege, for me anyway, I'm not thinking of it as that I'm losing something. I guess I frame it around that somebody might be gaining something. And so if I remember that and I'm looking for those moments where I can do it, or if I see it happening anywhere else, that I'm able to kind of speak on it and be available when someone's asking for it, and be available to kind of hear it and work and walk with people. You know, I think like, I don't know, there's some truth, and I promise you, I do not do it perfectly. I promise you that, you know.
Thank you. Nathan referenced a book by Heather McGee. It's called The Sum of Us. If you haven't read or heard of that, I highly, highly recommend it. It is a great book that I think should be mandatory reading for everybody.
And the podcast.
Yes, yeah, her podcast is great too. I've listened to a few of those episodes. She's with Michelle and Barack Obama's media, I think it's called Higher Ground Productions or something like that. Heather McGee, The Sum of Us, highly recommend. A few other questions in the chat. What practical tips do you have for having conversations with fearful white dudes?
I can try and take that one, Ben.
Go for it.
It's a great question, because I feel like I've run into a lot of those dudes. And
Sean, sorry, let me interrupt you real quick, because there's another
go
question right after that I think piggybacks off this. So I'm going to ask them both at the same time, just so you have all the information. For all panelists, do you have any advice on activating white men at work who are on the defensive about DEI work and helping them get off the defensive and onto our bandwagon? So similar vein questions, but sorry, floor is yours.
No, yeah, it's the great question, great add-on. And I think I've been a scared white dude myself too, so I don't want to act like, you know, I'm on some pedestal first and foremost. Secondly, let me say this real quick, because I've been told in Zoom before that I look like I'm frowning all the time. I swear I'm a happy dude. So if I look like I'm frowning, I swear I'm not. I'm happy on the inside. All right, so I think that's a really great question. The advice that I have is we have to listen. Like, I need to hear and listen to what it is that's making you afraid, or what it is, the information that you've received that is probably wrong, and that's making you feel the way you are in terms of the scared person. But then you also have to be, in my opinion, in my relationships, I also have to be real bold. Like, I have to listen, and then I have to kind of say, what you're saying right now is nonsense, and I need you to read this. And I share an article, or I share something. And, you know, then if the response comes back in 37 seconds, I'm like, I'm not talking to you about this until you've read this. Like, this is what I'm saying to you. Like, you need to read it, because I read it and it helped me. And you're asking questions that maybe I might have asked while I was reading it, or before I was reading, or whatever it was. And go back to it, and then, you know, text me tomorrow, or hit me up tomorrow with a phone call, or whatever it is. But you have to do that. The work one, can you repeat the work part one again, Ben? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Just similar question, you know, white men at work who are defensive and not really getting on board with DEI objectives. You know, how do you get people to kind of come around and be part of taking action instead of
I think some of it goes back to that self-love piece, you know, show your confidence, you know, in spaces around folks of color, show your ability to communicate and get along with folks. because I think that, you know, they'll see that reality, that genuine, that authenticity that you have in your workspace. And then that might open them up a little bit, but it's not easy. They have to do the work themselves. You know, just like Nathan just shared about Heather McGee, share things that you've read or podcasts you've listened to, and you know, make sure that you're listening and hearing, but be bold. So, but it's not easy. They're gonna have to, folks are gonna have to do work themselves as well.
Britton, anything to add to those questions or anything to add in general?
Yeah, well, I see some people are asking here in the chat about, you know, the impact of that Black Lives Matter statement that you read. I think it's probably a complicated answer. I think Wyden Kennedy has always been seen as a leader. And I think in some respects, I'm sure that what I thought was a very definitive statement, I think helped to solidify the agency as the leader in the DEI space specifically. And I think there's a lot, especially now, there's a lot of employees who are making more values-based decisions about where they want to work. And I think the same is also true for clients. I think there may be a lot of clients who saw that were like, yeah, that's the agency that I want to work with. So from a revenue perspective, I think that statement probably did a lot of good. From the employee side, you know, it's hard to say. You know, I'm a white guy, but I'm sure there are some Black employees or some people of color who probably read that statement and were like pretty cynical about it, and justifiably so. You know, maybe they have felt like there just aren't enough people in leadership, which there not enough people of color in leadership, which there aren't, who maybe felt like, you know, they aren't getting paid as much as they should be. So, you know, I think there's probably a few different perspectives when it comes to the impact of that statement. Cool.
Thank you. Whew. Well, I could talk here all day. I feel like we're just getting started, but I acknowledge we are coming up on time. I want to respect everybody's time. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody who dialed in today from across the country. Thank you for sharing time and space with us. Thank you to Nathan, Sean, and Britton, our panelists, for showing up today and keeping it real with us. I really appreciate that. For anybody, if you're curious how you or your company might benefit from working within the area productions, let's talk. Want to thank again our sponsor, Portland Houseworks, Mike Mitchoff and the team there. A deep appreciation for supporting conversations like this, and just kind of putting your money behind, you know, the importance of us all evolving and waking up tomorrow a little better than we are today. With that, have a phenomenal weekend, everybody. Peace and love, and thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nin.
Yeah, thank you, Nin.